KZSU-FM Stanford. Welcome to another edition of Hearsay Culture on the Hearsay Culture Network. My name is Dave Levine. I'm Associate Dean of Faculty Development and Professor at Elon University School of Law, as well as an affiliate scholar at the Center for Internet and Society at Stanford Law School. I'm also affiliated with the University of Milan's Information Society Law Center and UNC's Center for Information Technology and Public Life. We are in a world where jobs are threatened, or at least people think they're threatened. And the threat to jobs du jour is generative artificial intelligence, but technology more broadly. This is an issue of particular interest to me, given my background in labor relations and my work in employment law and employment discrimination law. And so when Matt Beane's book, The Skill Code, How to Save Human Ability in an Age of Intelligent Machines, came across my radar screen, I knew not only that I wanted to read the book for my own work, but that this would be a phenomenal topic for Hearsay Culture. And so I'm very excited to have the author of The Skill Code, Matt Beane, joining us today on Hearsay Culture. In The Skill Code, it's a mass market book, meaning that it's written for not only the academics in the world, but people who don't spend their time inside the proverbial ivory tower. And what Matt does is lay out what the challenges are, right? What we need as employees and what we need as a society in order to maintain the skill sets which we now perceive to be threatened by technology, but then, and very well received, what we should do about it. And so Matt uses a little bit of alliteration here in that he identifies the 3 C's, as he calls them, that humans need to develop mastery. And we think about mastery in the context of substance, right? I talk about mastery of law, but these are mastery of skills that run the range of what people might do with their lives. Those 3 C's are challenge, complexity, and connection. And then towards the latter third of the book, Matt talks about what to do about it, how to maintain those 3 C's with alliteration, the 3 Ds: discovery, development, and deployment. And what we're going to do is work through somewhat methodically in Hearsay Culture fashion what those complexities are, what the challenges are, what connection means before we get the solutions. Throughout the book, Matt uses real world, right, and theoretical examples to support these arguments. And I think very refreshingly, he's not calling for the end of humanity based upon technology, but he is, I think, in a very good way, clear-eyed as to what the risks might be and what we might do about them, which is a topic we've been talking about in Hearsay Culture for more or less for 15 years, most recently with Shannon Valor a few weeks ago with her book, The AI Mirror. So very excited to have Matt on today. By brief introduction, Matt is an assistant professor in the Technology Management Department at University of California, Santa Barbara, a digital fellow with Stanford's Digital Economy Lab and MIT's Initiative on the Digital Economy. He does field research on work involving robots and AI, and we'll talk a bit about robotics as well. His award-winning research has been published in top management journals, such as the Administrative Science Quarterly and the Harvard Business Review. He is joining us via Zoom on September 18th, 2024. Matt, thank you for joining us today on Hearsay Culture.
I am delighted to be here, and wow, quite an intro. If I didn't have a big head, I do now.
Well, that's my goal, Matt. I want to make my guests feel really good, and then hopefully Lisa will get an interview, and I try not to deflate myself or you in the process. So as I mentioned, prior to going on air, right, I grew up around publishing. My mother did jacket art design for HarperCollins. This is published by Harvard Business. And so I asked these kinds of very basic, but I think important questions to frame the discussion. It's one thing to talk about skills. It's another thing to talk about code, and we'll talk about both. But I wanted to ask about your subtitle, How to Save Human Ability in the Age of Intelligent Machines, right? Ability is an ambiguous word. And so when we talk about abilities in the context of your book, what abilities are you thinking about?
Well, so that's funny you should ask. Every single word on that cover, very, very precisely chosen and checked against both Merriam-Webster, but also research. And capability and ability, if you go look them up, ability reflects something that you can accomplish reliably in the world that you couldn't before you developed that skill set or before you learned. Capability is something you can do out of the box, something essentially that's wired into your genes. Doesn't require development. So it was a synonym for skill that to fit into the subtitle. Anyway.
And look, as someone who grew up around publishing, I found that book titles either go two directions. Either they are very carefully thought through, kind of the way you're describing, but then there's always an element of marketing, or they have sometimes nothing to do really with the book, and it's all about marketing. So I'm glad to see that yours kind of fits both, because you have the helix, right, on the cover of the book, right? You've got what appears to be, right, your standard kind of genome, right, graphic. Why is that there?
Well, and that's the code bit. So I think probably the right way to think about the first third of this book is that it is, to the extent that we have one, my best shot anyway at producing the grand, unified, but atomic level theory of how we build skill being the ability to reliably do something under pressure. So there's a lot of work out there on learning in many, many disciplines, and it tends to string sort of certain sets of experiences together in sequences that lead to the ability at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. And those are often useful and correct, and increasingly don't mesh well with the new digital enabled reality that we're living in. And so in theory, the right thing to do here was write a book that was one of those process model based theories about how, it sort of showed, here's how learning happens for all human beings in all contexts across this, swath of experience. The more responsible thing I decided to do from my perspective was to give you the alphabet, so to speak, of what it takes in order for a human to build skill, because we are now breaking the grammar, the alphabet of how we build skill apart. We have been for decades, but now it's just much more intense. And reassembling it, often it looks like what somebody would expect from 1943, but not always. And so the code in the book are those 3 C's that you mentioned in your intro, and they are the moral equivalent, I decided, of the 4 amino acids in DNA, right? Discovering what those were allowed us to do better, more precise science about biology. We understood the basic chemistry of life. And I think of these 3 C's as those basic building blocks, and therefore the barest beginning for understanding what sequences, what produce what results in what conditions, what is the grammar of skill development in the 21st century, in 2024 and beyond. The grammar will change, but I believe the atomic units, these, this 3 C's will not. And that was, so I wanted to produce something that would be eternal in that sense, that in 40 years would still be incontrovertible. And yet the sequences that would be manifest and useful and so on, the ways that humans and robots participate in them, you'll notice in that helix on the cover, there are little humans. It's like a little Where's Waldo thing. Little humans and robots, right? Who's doing what's doing what with respect to skill development. The boundary between human and technology has been blurring for centuries. It's just accelerating, I think, and intensifying. So anyway, that was the intention behind the whole code bit, is to do something that would meet anyone where they were with respect to skill development, no matter what was actually going on the ground. You have to do more work on the user end then. You have to figure out, okay, what's the useful sequence here? Right. But trying to superimpose something on, any other effort felt like superimposing something from the ivory tower on them.
Well, and it's interesting. You quote the late Anthony Bourdain in your even before your preface, where you have a quote from him where he said, "With all due respect to my former professors, I've long believed I gained more knowledge in kitchens, bars, and dining rooms than any college could even hold." Now, you're a professor, I'm a professor. I won't take it personally, but it does raise the bigger point, which is something I want to get to before I follow follow up on the ambition that you mentioned with your book, which I think I'd be failing as an interviewer if I didn't follow up on. So you've written a book with a goal of having this book be useful 40 years from now. Now, that is extremely ambitious. And I'm curious what in the book or what about the book you see as being capable, given the advancements in technology and, in fact, the advancements that we're witnessing right now, will make this the kind of book with the crystal balls such as they are that would be useful in 40 years.
Yeah, so you were right to break the book up into three basic acts. That's that's how I see it, put it that way. And so Act One is the skill code that we are just talking about. The day that challenge, complexity, and connection are no longer fundamental and relevant to skill development, I think is the day that the human species doesn't exist as such. So, am I wrong? Time will tell, but so that's part one. The middle part has also speaks, I think, an empirical truth that I found records of in ancient Greece. There's archaeological records of the threat that is in the middle of this book, basically. All the way up till today, and in my own research and so on, which is essentially that the way we tend to handle new technologies that automate work is that we design them so that a single expert can produce more valuable whatever with either less or commensurate effort. And part of the way that occurs is that it transfigures the new usage pattern transfigures the relationship between that expert and their novice or novices that are working with them. Now, up until recent history, that's been perfectly fine in that there's always more stuff for that novice to do, and they can maintain close collateral contact with that expert. So that they can learn. That's the primary mechanism for skill development. The world around it has been for eons, not school. Sorry, sorry. And the new threat is these intelligent technologies, robots, AI, and the like, are that much more potent at extending an expert's problem-solving capability into the world, such that they know novices are, in many and increasing range of cases, strictly optional. You may involve them, but you do not need to for much longer stretches of time. And that's the threat. The threat is we're breaking that eons old engine for skill development that actually underwrites human progress. School is a sideshow. School is a new way of getting us to be able to do more complicated work faster. But still, the primary engine is that. In 40 years, I think the empirics will, unless we do something radically to reconfigure it, which is the third part of the book, that threat is not obvious until you consider the research. I think that's the feedback I've been getting, but instantly recognizable on the ground once folks kind of get it in their mind. So I hope and trust, certainly across all the research I've been able to pull together and do myself, that seems sort of sociologically true. In other words, pick your technology, pick your profession, pick your industry. Intelligent technology in the mix means novice optional. That's the sort of sociologically true fact. And the third part of the book is it doesn't have to be that way, folks. In fact, here are some exceptions I've found in my research where, in fact, precisely the opposite thing happens. We drag some new intelligent technology into the work, and skill development improves dramatically for novices. They are rare, they are accidental, and in fact, in many cases, folks work to avoid being known as discovering these new ways of learning because they bend and break rules to create them. And if there is systematic success out there that relies on AI instead of skill development being broken down by the way we're handling AI, and it's happening independently and consistently, that means there are new hidden practices out there, approaches to designing the tech, selling it, putting it to use, and so on, that can make things better than they ever could have possibly been before with respect to skill development. So I hope that that third part of the book, the particulars of it, of course, folks are going to laugh at that in 20 years. In some parts of it, I myself have looked back at the last chapter of that book and went, "Oh, that's cute, kid." Like, I'm working on something now that I didn't write into that last chapter, and in fact, with retrospect, should have totally. Anyway,
and let me come. I want to come back to where the postscript is, but just to drill down on this point, if I understand you correctly, the 40-year prospect for the book is really humanity's self-interest in remaining human, in a sense, right? In other words, and I do want to talk about this, right? You talk about challenge, complexity, and connection. The connection part, I think, is what we're talking about here, in the sense of connecting, as you write about in the book, the experts with the novice, right? But the challenge and complexity part, though, does seem to be threatened more immediately by technologies as they currently exist and are being deployed. Can you talk to us a little bit, because I think we talked about connection a little bit. Can we talk a little bit more about what you mean by challenge and complexity?
Sure. So there are 10-point checklists in the book in each of the chapters devoted to those 3 C's that give any reader the specific behaviors or phenomena to look for to decide, is challenge or complexity or connection, are they in healthy supply right now for me or somebody I care about or my organization? So we're not going to go into that much detail, but I will just say upfront, challenge across more than 13 streams of research, and of course my own disciplines, very far-ranging disciplines, neurobiology all the way down to cultural anthropology. Basically, the basic story there, education's another good one. Humans learn best when we are working close to, but not at the edge of our capability. We are not performing at our best, and we are not comfortable. So in the case of observing this in the OR, which I did for about 2.5 years, watching surgeons learn how to be surgeons, you're often literally sweating. You can't hear or see most of what's going on. The rest of the world kind of becomes this Charlie Brown teacher, like you're focused on what you're doing, and you are uncomfortable. That's an excellent sign that you are building skill, because but you're not beyond where you could perform. You're not overwhelmed. Experts can help a lot with this. So you can do more, better, faster in that territory. You can actually eat more challenge healthily with an expert scaffolding you through it. And I talk about that in the book. So anyway, bottom line, this novice optional thing obviously breaks that, because as I saw it very vividly in the OR, like a resident going in there to learn how to do robotic surgery would help set that thing up, attach it to a patient, and then sit at a control console and just watch for 4 hours as a senior surgeon did the operation. So no challenge at all. Complexity is maybe the least intuitive of the 3, but it basically is a complement to challenge. Challenge is the sort of, you can think of it as the notion of, I got to work hard to get good at a thing, whether it's writing a legal brief or tying a suture or valuing a company for a merger and acquisition. You want to focus on that and get good, and it's hard. The complexity is simultaneously engaging with the broader universe of skills, knowledge, roles, people, transactions associated with your work that you're embedded in. So practically for a surgeon, this is, fine, you want to focus on getting good at tying a knot. After a little bit, however, what about what that nurse is doing? What's her job? What's his job? What about the finances of this institution? How does this place make money? What about, and different people will have different areas that they sort of begin to get curious about, or, this one went funny. Why did that go funny? Like exploring edge cases and understanding causes of surprise. Someone who's really good at their job, a focal task, an investment, a beat cop who can sort of knows how and where to walk around their neighborhood. They've engaged with complexity in a healthy way, such that they are ready for a surprise that is associated with it being hot out and summertime being the cause of X. And that takes, that you have to struggle and mess around in the space and kind of look left and look right as you go, so that you build those encounters with complexity. That we're currently handling intelligent technologies in a way that threaten complexity, partially because experts can get straight to their answer, their output, their productivity much faster without collateral, messy contact with other people, jobs, tasks, flows, and so on. They just can skate straight from A to Z. And for a novice, they are working much harder, sort of sprinting harder to stand still on trying to get up to bat, so to speak, on their skill development. And so let's go back to your publishing example. An assistant in the publishing industry doesn't get sent to go through 50 files to find a contract about X and then get a chance to read 49 other files about potential book deals and learn some other stuff about, oh, that's interesting. All these proposals are set up the same way. Like that, they shouldn't be there learning about that, but there's some natural inefficiencies in search associated with that task that are now cut out of their workflow because they need to be more efficient too.
And Matt, we're chatting with Matt Beane, author of the book The Skill Code on KZSU-FM, Stanford, and Hearsay Culture. Framing it as you do, I can imagine listeners saying, "Well, look, we've had new technologies in the past, right? I mean, you think about Taylorism and the assembly line, right? Was going to end, right, humanity because robots were going to build everything, and even very recently, right? I mean, within the last 15 years, robots at this point were supposed to be taking over all kinds of things. I mean, I do vividly remember, and I'm sure, you recall as well that, even 10 years ago, people were saying the steering wheel wasn't going to be necessary in cars potentially right now in 2024 because we have self-driving cars. But you identify in the middle of the book, right, where you talk about the threat to these 3Cs, and I'm not done with the 3Cs yet. What makes now different? And you identify two aspects which are important: velocity and diversity. Now, we've spent a lot of time on Hearsay Culture on velocity, and even in my work outside of Hearsay Culture, I've been very concerned about how quickly generative AI has been deployed as compared to the internet. And I think that's what you mean by velocity, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. But what do you mean by diversity? That's a different point, I think, entirely.
Right, exactly. So yes, we are aligned on velocity, and I do think that there's a reasonable argument to be made there. Diversity is that in many ways, I think one way to sort of sum this up is that these increasingly intelligent technologies, and by the way, that term is utterly sort of meaningless. I mean,
intelligent technologies.
Yeah, but what it does actually seem to work. It is technically meaningless, but it does work in that it conveys that our technologies are multi-purpose, increasingly multi-purpose and multimodal. In other words, it's not one tool for one job as much anymore. And this means that in many different aspects of your job, many kinds of interaction you might engage in, many kinds of outputs you might create, there are this kind of novice optional problem is going to be evident in not just a single channel. You're going to be having, for instance, the move to remote work obviously was driven sort of catastrophically by a pandemic, but that trend had been going on for quite some time. That is, as academics say, orthogonal to this question of like co-location or not, is very different from the sort of collaborative involvement required to produce a work product, which is itself separate from your communications channel with people. And all of those things can now be at relatively low cost, be mediated by ostensibly the same technology. So there was a sort of a single channel of interference that, or maybe single's wrong, but like fewer channels of interference before. Whereas now, if you're just coming out of college, entering the workplace, you have to contend with multiple headwinds from multiple directions involving a technology. And the reason for that is that the technologies are modular. You can repurpose them very rapidly. They're digital at relatively low cost. So one investment by a firm, they're going to be looking for multiple ways to take advantage of these technologies.
And so you've been talking a lot about the role of the novice and the importance of the novice. And so thinking about what novices do today versus what novices in any number of industries would have done 50 or 100 years ago begs the question, what's wrong with being ahead of the game? In other words, the analogy I might use is, I'm holding a ballpoint pen here, right? The
Yep.
ballpoint pen has ink in it, right? And it flows to a point that has a little ball in it, and I can pick it up, I hit a button, or I don't even have to, depending on the kind of pen, and I can start writing. I don't have to grab a feather or a quill and a bottle of ink and dip it in the ink and make sure it's flowing properly. Is that the kind of skill where you look at it and say, you know what? We're starting ahead of where we were before, which means we can get further and we're not losing anything.
Exactly. Yes. This is you are striking quite close to the heart of what I've been focused on for the last year and a half, actually. So sort of since the ink was dry, so to speak,
Yeah.
not to belabor that metaphor.
Very good. That's good. I like it. Yeah.
On the book,
Yeah.
this is precisely the question I'm on about with generative AI in particular,
Mhm.
and from a research point of view. So back in the day, you and I'm sure both remember the advent of GPS, and there was a lot of
Mhm.
folks who were,
Mhm.
and it's used as an analogy for generative AI. It's not quite right, but
Mhm.
folks were like, "Oh, we're all losing our sense of direction,"
Mhm. Right.
right? And so, who cares is the question, and why? In many cases, it is of no consequence to anyone that we may or may not be losing our sense of direction as a result of using that technology. We get better results, and nobody cares, and that's fine. And you can have theoretical conversations about, well, what would happen if it all went off? But it's just not a practical reality. Um, and so, in many cases, I think it is healthy for human society as a collective, and in fact most individuals, that we quickly have, novices arrive and they're like, no, granddad, I'm not going to use that thing. Like I grew up without learning to drive, and why should I learn to drive a car? Can
Mhm.
you prove to me that that is necessary? um, and I think in the case of using generative AI at work these days, um, the ability to write is something that is talked about quite a lot as a potential concern. Like if I can just kind of toss a document into my generative AI and then ask for a thesis-based summary of that and get it, and then do a couple tweaks and submit and get an A or an A minus, what difference does it make if I can need to learn to write?
Mhm.
If I can just do that then in my job?
Mhm.
And in many cases, I think the answer is it is of no consequence. Um, that old skill of thinking and writing is now functionally irrelevant for many people. Now, is that empirically true, and is it sustainably true over years? We don't know yet. It's way too early to say. However, I don't it's not obvious to me that all the old skills that we, old as in like 2022,
Right.
that
Right.
we used to think of as critical, like learning to think and write, just to stick with that one, um, are or are not going to be really critical. But there are very interesting arguments online amongst even academics about like, well, okay, consultants can now do 4 times as much work in the same amount of time, but they don't actually understand what they've produced. Uh,
Mhm.
and so that's not skill. And then other people saying, no, no, that's skill. I mean, you could use a calculator and not be able to do long division. So you've lost the skill of long division, but you can still get accurate calculations done. Or you can use Excel. Like
Mhm.
who? So I think there are some instances where we will be losing skill by using. I have an article on my Substack that's the Substack is wildworldofwork.org. And the article
Mhm.
there last October was "Don't Let AI Dumb You Down."
Mhm.
And there are many default instances where using that technology will subtly deprive you of skill over time. If you always have it available and you always understand your task, it's of no consequence. But the minute somebody throws you something surprising, or you need to do some ad hoc analysis, your skill will turn out to be much more frail and brittle,
Mhm.
and not suited to the real world. You're not going to be ready for the surprises that come with an actual real job.
Mhm.
We just it's too early for us to
Yep.
know how much of A and B we're going to get out of that equation. Um, so anyway, I'm trying to understand how we make choices about what to delegate away. And in theory, what should that predict about the consequences, and work to come there soon. But it's going to be years before we figure that stuff out.
Right. We're chatting with Matt Beane, author of the book The Skill Code on KZSU-FM Stanford and the Hearsay Culture Network. KZSU is a nonprofit, non-commercial radio station at Stanford University that requires donations from listeners to continue its diverse programming. Please email us at donate@kzsu.stanford.edu and check out the additional shows, not just Hearsay Culture, but my show R&D with D&D with Denise Howell, Denise's show Uneven Distribution, my show Secrets, at the Hearsay Culture Network's website at hearsayculture.com. So I think, Matt, when we're talking about skills here and your previous response, maybe the way to think about this is to think about why we have skills in the first place, right? So it's one thing to say, you should be able to do this because it'll get you a job, or you should be able to do this because you're going to be more efficient. But it seems to be very different to say you should have this skill because it's what makes you human, or it's the joy of life. Shannon Valor, who I mentioned earlier, and others have talked about this, but is that a dividing line? As long as we're talking about your current research, and I will emphasize that, as you've said, you're in the middle of this research, or you just started it. The point is you don't have conclusions, but at least at this point on September 18, 2024, it would seem to matter greatly if we say, machines can paint for us or make music, but it's kind of fun to make music. And now I'm going to analogize back to recorded sound, right? John Philip Sousa, and Larry Lessig uses this as an example in his talks for 25 years, right? Lessig has said, John Philip Sousa predicted that recorded sound was going to end live music. I mean, it's much more eloquently stated, right? And of course, we still have live music. So is that a dividing line between the skills that quote unquote matter and the skills that don't?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why skill itself matters, not just any particular skill.
Mm-hmm.
So shot through those, anybody who's spent any time in, say, undergrad psychology will see shot through a fair chunk of those 3C chapters is something called self-determination theory. It's got over 2 million citations, just utterly a wild amount of attention and validation in the psychological research community. And one of the core findings there is that the drive to competence is a basic human drive.
Mm-hmm.
Humans like to engage with the real world and get better at handling it over time. Part of that is intrinsically satisfying. And this is part of the connection chapter, it is also part of the way that we make our way in a social world. It's part of how we build status and warm bonds of trust and respect, which is that third C, the connection. Part of the reason you want to get up in the morning to try to get good at surgery or writing a case brief is there's someone you look up to who's going to examine your work, and you want them. It is just motivating to you for them to look at your work and go, hey, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or even for them to tell you, not today, that didn't work, and here's why. I want you to do better. I know you can do better, that kind of thing. That interaction is valuable for humans, the way that we are wired, the way that we function. We just intrinsically value that. So no matter what our technology is capable of doing independently, unless and until we rewire ourselves, we can trust and expect that humans will pursue getting better at stuff, building skill, no matter what's going on in the world. So which particular skills we want to build in general, roughly, if you look at the arc of history, we build technologies that automate something. Moving a rock with Archimedes' lever, we can go all the way back there to generative AI. And then humans, roughly speaking, again, it could be done more elegantly and so on always, but we figure out a way to complement that new scaling of our effort. And that's part of our drive to competence. It's not just building a skill, it's finding out what skills are relevant. This is how we invent the new tasks that economists talk about that come with technological disruption. It's not just that we do less farming and more other, what's the new web development was not a thing 50 years ago.
Right.
We invented that as a way of complementing the tech that we invented, and getting good at that new thing is part of what the human species does as a collective, and individuals try to do.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is just the meaning in your life comes from getting good at stuff that we don't often think of. um, Motivation, meaning, and human bonds as having anything really to do with skill development, but they are integral to it.
And it seems that, again, and I want to get to what to do about it in a moment. But, another theme that runs through this, and I started the show with it, right, is the role of mentors, right? It's not just that, you need to have novices, but that there need to be, and this is the key point, right? Human mentors for, right, the skill development. And again, although not the theme of your book, I would say for, the continued survival of humanity. And I think about that in my own personal experience, and this is, I want to get your reaction to it, in terms of this construct. I tell my law students about this all the time under the heading of professionalism, but also allowing yourself to learn. I made what I thought was a fatal mistake for a client when I was a junior associate in practice. Doesn't matter what it was, but I thought, oh my God, I made a terrible error, and it's going to be it. The client's going to lose the case. I'm going to lose my license. I'm not going to pay my bills back, and I'm going to be bankrupt. I mean, my brain was able to go in that direction because, of course, we train lawyers to find the worst case outcome, and that's what drives us nuts. At any rate, here's the mentorship point, right? Someone told me, why don't you go talk to a very senior attorney who was more or less retired and coming into the office those days to read the paper and kind of just be kind of this, almost Olympus-like character. So I went in literally shaking. This is going to be it. I'm going to be fired. Told the story. He looks at me, he smiles, and he says, Dave, and I'll never forget this. He says, Dave, there's very little that you can do that we can't fix, which was a blessing. And then we fixed it. And I had made a mistake. I want to be clear, but it was not nearly as catastrophic as what I thought it was. And it was because of human mentorship. Human mentorship. No book could have given me that comfort. No book could have given me that confidence. And at that moment, it was the highest good deed you could imagine. And I'm curious to get your reaction to that in terms of, again, remember the subtext, right? The subtitle of your book, How to Save Human Ability in the Age of Intelligent Machines. It would seem that notwithstanding machines, those kinds of human reactions, positive and negative, would matter greatly, regardless of how much technology is out there, so long as we're still human beings.
Always have, always will.
Mm-hmm.
That's the claim in the book, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to also say that this is the sort of fundamental atomic unit in that connection, the third C of connection, is a warm bond of trust and respect. Those words I chose extraordinarily carefully. They are precisely operationalized in science. And it is obvious to me that it is not required that that bond involve two human counterparts. So spin the world forward a little bit. Even today, we know actually that human beings are building something that weakly approximates a warm bond of trust and respect with non-human entities. And so it is not obvious to me that in the grand sweep of history, fast forward, the 40 years, this book gets read in 40 years, that we don't have those kinds of bonds that are truly meaningful, generative, nurturing, that span the human non-human divide, to sort of blow the mind open a little bit. In the short
so to
run,
be clear, are we talking about robots or are you talking about something else?
Non-human entity. I don't know what I'm talking about. In 40 years, I'm not going to call that pitch. Like what constitutes technology? Also, what constitutes a human? I mean, we're putting implants into people now all the time. Anyway, but to keep it much more practical, real, and local, that the term mentorship is operationalized in social sciences to refer to a long-standing relationship that spans the personal and professional. So somebody who engages with you over the course of long periods to help you get better, maybe get more work opportunities, but also you get to know each other as people, and you end up connected to each other personally over time, and that then translates and transforms as you become a competent, sort of equally senior member of the profession or occupation you're in, to the point where you're sort of peers in a new way, and so on. And they get to crow about you as somebody that they used to mentor. those kind of the capital M mentorship is relatively rare. Used to be more common back in the workshop days, back in, say, ancient Greece or China or what have you. What's much more common is the kind of interaction you just described, which is short-lived between someone who has a great deal of expertise and status and capability and perspective on the work and can help you recontextualize the challenge and the complexity that you're engaged with in a way that both builds a bond of trust and respect in both directions, by the way, but also helps you re-engage with the problem in a way that builds your capability. So it's part of your skill development journey, but these are myriad in anyone's reasonable career. You have, it might last a moment, it might last a day, it might last a week, a month, a project. We interact with people who know more all the time. Thank goodness there's a universe of experts you're going to collide with as you get better. And that's how, that's why I picked, rather than mentor mentee, expert novice, because that's like the superset of the mentor mentee interaction. So for the practical future, we need to design, I'll just skip straight to the imperative, design the technologies, these intelligent technologies, sell them, implement them in ways that enhance those kinds of connections, make them easier to make, rather than the opposite. The opposite is what we got right now. That's the default. And that is the most precious, motivating unit. It also is the thing that gets you practically your next job opportunity, because that person could vouch for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of access too.
But let me interrupt you, Matt. Because I want to come to it, but I'm hung up on the notion that, and I'm sorry if I am hung up on it. I just said it, right? Yeah. 40 years out, you must be envisioning. I'm going to go back to what are these human, non-human interactions? And I recognize you don't have a crystal ball, so I absolve you of all of that. I'm not going to, God willing, I'm around 40 years from now, and so are you, and I can say you were right or you were wrong. But I'm just curious. I mean, you must be envisioning something when you think about what this, in theory, could look like. And of course, you can go back 40 years to predictions and, of all kinds of things. But, are you talking about something like, for example, right, to try to contextualize it with what exists today, right? Psychologists will sometimes say, you know what, you don't need me. Go to this chatbot, right, that can kind of approximate advice or at least connection or at least help you, if I'm unavailable and you have an emergency. Is it something like that? The inanimate chatbot? Is it, without getting too science fiction-y, what is that human, non-human interaction? What does that look like in your mind?
I'll give you just to cobble together some currently available tech.
Yep.
Right now, we are beginning to, for the last 8 months or so, for those who have been ruthlessly paying attention, the next wave of what's coming in generative AI is agentic AI. And that's generative AI with memory bolted on, basically. In other words, and the ability to build complex plans and create sort of, what do they call it? Self-healing amongst technologists, which is ridiculous. It's funny. What they mean is creative problem solving en route, right? You can go look at systems like Devin, for instance, online, which is one of the early entrants here that will, if you ask it to do a complicated task, like go make money online, it will devise a plan for doing that and get to work. And you can chat with it and say, how's it going? But it will work for, say, hours, until it says, I need the ability to accept credit card payments through Stripe. And you go, well, why? How did you figure that out? Well, I'm billing myself out as a consultant online for advice on how to deal with generative AI at work. And I can make money that way, right? And it has coded up an interface for doing that in a website. So we're at the very beginning of that kind of agentic AI. But the implied capability there is memory, planning, creative resolution of problems. We also have studies in medicine of people interacting with docs versus AI to get their diagnosis and so on, where people prefer not trust the answer from the AI more and think it has better bedside manner. And we have one of the most profitable AI companies out there is Replica.ai, where people are developing long-standing, intimate bonds of connection with non-human entities, right? Spin these all together and forward by just 5 years. And it's not a giant leap, I think, to imagine that you could have a digital boss at work, somebody who you didn't report to, couldn't give you orders, but knew exactly who you were, what you were good at, what you hope to get good at, could make helpful suggestions to you about what you might work on, could be watching your work with your permission to say, hey, you know what? You're about to go into this meeting. Have you thought about X? And you go, oh, damn, that's a good one. And could empathize with you in a way that was objectively better, more superior, more enriching than a human. Now, that future, seems quite feasible, quite proximate, and is very unsettling to me, even. Like that I'm like, whoa. And yet, if we think of, like, I studied surgery originally, right? That technology was invented to allow for remote surgery on people who otherwise would die without surgery. So I think there are millions of working adults now who are metaphorically speaking dying because they don't have a good expert around to mentor them. Would you rather have them have nothing, or would you rather them have something like the system I just described? You'd rather them have both. But what about both? Can we imagine a world in 10 years where humans won't have some sort of bond of trust and respect or something like that with a system like this plus a human manager? I just don't think it's wise to rule that kind of thing out. It seems
well, no, I would go further, Matt, and say that's precisely where I think we would wind up, because as we get to the latter third of your book, the 3Ds, as it were, right? I mean, running through all of this is one word: efficiency. But let's be clear, right? You don't need to feed the computer. The computer will work 24/7. It's not going to complain. It doesn't need a union. I mean, you go down the list, right? Not to mention it's faster and cheaper, while the technology improves. I mean, even if we accept all of the risks associated with your describing, even if you and I both agree, and I think we would, that we're highly disturbed by the scenario you just described, not to mention the horizon for it, how, as a practical matter, do we overcome the E word, efficiency, particularly where these technologies are being deployed by the private sector?
Right. I think the writing's sort of on the wall in this sense, and I'll just speak from the sort of edge of the coalface I'm touching now. So, those who invest in tech startups, especially say in Silicon Valley, are very, very well aware now, are well educated on the unintended side effects of big hits with technology. So the internet, social media, the people who made their fortunes off of those kinds of innovations are those who are sort of paying attention, feel a fair amount of guilt about that because it turned out to produce really nasty unintended side effects. And so I think there are certain sectors of that of the tech sector that are well aware of that and are very attuned to, well, this tech is it's going to create some nasty unintended social effects, or it's going to change quality of life or compensation for workers in a way that is we don't want or intend. So I think that just creates a larger appetite than we've ever seen before on the part of technologists and actually purchasing managers in companies to say, wait, let's not do that whole thing again. Can I buy your productivity enhancing tech and have comfort, provable comfort, that just by using it, my employees are going to build their capability over time. And that includes bonds of trust and respect between human beings, by the way. So just by engaging with generative AI at the end of a session, it's kind of like putting in time to your 401k. You are nudged towards healthier skill development, healthier human connection. Most tech vendors today would hear that question and go, well, what do you mean?
Right.
But they would also readily admit that if you look objectively at the default uses of their system, it's going to separate humans from each other, but also the challenge and complexity they need to thrive. So whoever goes first, whether it's Microsoft, Anthropic, Google, what have you, to say, we've reconfigured our thing so that just by using it, yeah, it's going to be mildly annoying, but you have no choice. Sorry, it's turned on permanently. You are going to build your own independent, valuable skill and connections with other human beings as a result of using our system. I think they're going to win in the marketplace. There's a way to, that will attract a lot more customers because we all have this intuitive sense, like we are sacrificing our human connection and ability on the altar of productivity by just starting to use this stuff as it is out of the box.
But Matt, I mean, I could just, I could imagine easily people saying, okay, and you kind of alluded to this maybe a half hour ago, right? I think you used the phrase that's cute or that's naive or whatever it was, right? And then, right, even with all of that, we're going to look at the value of our stock and how much is our wallet, and we're going to do the easy route, right? And the gold rush right now that's happening around AI in particular means, all of that's great. There's a market to be made in that space. But meanwhile, let's just keep deploying this. And on the consumption side of it, the people making the decisions are looking at their bank accounts and saying, well, there are fewer human beings.
Yeah, well, and the people actually using it in organizations, by the way, are the employees. Microsoft's recent survey of this, and it's very robust data, more than 30,000 people, all sectors of the economy. 74%, I think, of us are at work are using this tech. Individuals are using it, and we are all reaping returns in the form of spare time. Like we're just getting our job done faster, and maybe our employer doesn't know why and how. Right. And we're extracting that rent. So I agree with you. I think the overwhelming mass of the economy right now is just pouncing on this stuff for productivity's sake. Everyone's motivated to do it. Experts like it. They get to solve more and better, cooler, faster problems with less effort. Organizations love that, as you say, the ROI, et cetera. Even when it's messy in the beginning, we have no idea what we're doing with this stuff. And so I have cottoned on to the group of people who are professionally responsible for skill development and learning and development as the audience who is professionally equipped to notice this problem, has the mandate to do something about it, and therefore, maybe can join key conversations like the one I just mentioned, like, do we buy 20,000 Microsoft Copilot licenses?
Right.
Are they in the room, and can they say, okay, love you, and change your feature set so that our people are upskilled just by using your tech? What can you do? You have a week. And the CEO's back has their back. So I'm trying to find places where people who they might not think of themselves as this having this power, but they do. There are people whose professional responsibility it is to sort of tend to human ability and cultivating it and extending it. Those folks have a ton of power right now.
Well, it's off air, but since people know my title, this is what I'd like to discuss with you and kind of have you come back on the show to talk about, because of my new capacity as Associate Dean for Faculty Development at Elon. This is exactly what I think about. So in the few minutes that we have left, and I try to end on a note of not complete dystopian chaos. You do talk about, right, that there are ways to approach this. We've alluded to them. Let's just be clear about those 3Ds. So tell us a little bit about those in a couple of minutes in terms of where we go from here. Discover, develop, and deploy.
Right. Discover being the key thing. What you can trust, if you buy the argument up to this point, is that in your context, your profession, your occupation, your organization, your work group, some people are figuring out the new way to build skill in spite of all of the barriers and trouble that we've been discussing so far. Their solutions will be imperfect. They will be, in some cases, inappropriate, because appropriate means to learn are busted. So they're going to have, a few people will find inappropriate ways. I talk about these folks in the book. I call them shadow learners. One way or another, discovery is your main objective. Somebody in your situation is figuring something out that is valuable to extend a healthier human ability future for everyone. Finding them, understanding them, and then finding a way to scale their successes or discoveries is the task. So discover, develop is the scaling bit, right? So fine, we're not going to copy somebody who's breaking the rules to build their skill. That's obviously not going to work. However, we need to develop a solution that is workable for somebody who does follow the rules, which is most of us most of the time. Humans are generally compliant. And for organizations, that's a good thing. Professions, that's a good thing. how can we throw out the bathwater and keep the baby? What is their a new tactic, a new approach, a new design of the technology, a new way of dealing with it? That in the case of bomb disposal, this was giving the novice the controls to the robot instead of the expert. It's an accident of history, as far as I can tell, with the military. That made a crucial difference to restructuring that interaction in a healthier way. Then once you have developed it, then you have to deploy, test, iterate, and see how it's all going. Of course, this is basically, you have a hypothesis about what should work. It's well grounded in somebody who stuck their neck out to figure out a new way. So it can't be terrible, but then you're extracting something from that. So it's not obvious it's going to work. You have to test that. You have to gather data and see how it's going. That's the basic cycle there.
And so, in closing, and it really kind of, I think, ties it together. Part of the big picture of all of this, right, is access, right? Access to the technology, access to mentors, access to, as I talk about with my students, and I've talked about when I was in practice, right? Having people who run interference for you, right, to avoid the minefields professionally and personally, for that matter, but also who care, right? And technology doesn't care, right? Except if we get into the dystopian world of, the singularity and all those, which I don't even want to talk about here, right? But let's just, to be clear, right? The technology doesn't care, right? Whether you are a human or not, doesn't know whether you're human or not, right? It's the paperclip problem that many people are familiar with, right? If you set the computer in a direction, it'll destroy the world to make a better paperclip, right? And so grappling with all of that seems to be at the core of the skill code, which is that sense of human, not just connection, right? But that sense of knowing what humans are. Are we at the precipice of that as well? Or do your 3Ds address that too?
Well, I think that is a profoundly important question to ask rather ruthlessly and aggressively in the coming years. In the short run, experts, especially I'll just pick on you, who clearly care a great deal and are making sacrifices to support the development of new folks coming into an organization, a profession, or what have you. Should find a way to become uncomfortable enough with all of this new productivity enhancing tech to realize that your default move will be to weaken that bond with those junior folks just because you're more efficient yourself. That doesn't mean you should give up your efficiency, but for every single expert, with anybody with any significant expertise listening to this, the real question is, how can I get the gains from this tool while also making it easier, richer, better to connect with junior people that I care about? I want to earn their trust and respect. That flows both ways. Part of what is meaningful and significant about being an expert is being looked up to, earning that respect. And so you should treat that as a deep and personal threat to the meaning in your life. That is an existential question. And so anyway, I don't think we have clear answers on how to solve that problem from an individual sort of dyadic point of view. But experts will be very tempted. I'm seeing it in organizations, especially that are successful and profitable and so on, that it's very straightforward to kind of coast along and because you've already made it, basically.
Exactly.
And finding a way to be troubled is the main first thing, so that you can look at the humans around you. By the way, the junior folks are trying their best, probably, and they don't know any different. They won't know what they're missing out on, so they won't know to protest quite. So it's incumbent upon that senior person to notice that those junior people are not getting what they got coming up, and that expert needs to fight for it right away.
Well, that is the charge that I want to end this discussion with. Matt Beane, author of the book, The Skill Code, How to Save Human Ability in an Age of Intelligent Machines. Absolutely critical book, and essential, and I emphasize, written for all of us, not just for the expert. Thank you for joining us on Hearsay Culture and the Hearsay Culture Network and educating my listeners.
My pleasure.
Check out more of what Hearsay Culture offers at hearsayculture.com. Meanwhile, thank you for listening today on KZSU. Stay tuned for more diverse programming and have a great day.